Welcome everyone to another series in CPD in 43. Today we have the ABS in association with 9 to Thrive, the importance of psychological health for architectural technologists, with Nicola Rich, who will be presenting to you today. Naturally, if you have any questions, please do add them into the chat box and Q&A session. Naturally, due to the subject matter, we understand that this may not be something that people are comfortable with, so please do reach out to the ABS directly if you have any queries or concerns. We have preempted this and have a range of questions from ATs that have been provided privately, anonymously. When we reach the Q&A session, there are a number of questions that we will be answering, but please do feel free. We will not be naming names, so if you do ask a question, we will just be anonymously asking those questions and answering accordingly. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Nicola and I'll come back into the Q&A session in due course.
Thank you, Usman, and welcome everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here today and slightly intimidating to see all of those people on this call. So I'm just going to take a deep breath and I'm going to get straight into this presentation. This is a really important subject, something I feel quite passionate about. So I'm Nicola. I've spent nearly 20 years working alongside professionals in the architectural world. I'm a psychoanalyst and I'm a coach, and I'm someone who's seen this industry from inside the pressure cooker. I'm quite aware of the constant demands and the relentless revisions that you have to make, and the mental juggling act between technical detail and creativity, and it can be quite a lot actually to handle. And what I've learned over the years, that even the smallest shifts in how we think, how we decompress, and how we connect with others can actually make a real difference, not just in terms of how we feel, but how we perform. So today's conversation is not just about theory. I want to make this practical and suggest some tools actually and some tips around what we can do to maintain good psychological health in the industry that we work in and in the roles as ATs that we perform. So let's get straight to it. Your mind is your primary piece of kit, right? It is your number one tool. Whether you're drafting, designing, negotiating, your cognitive clarity is going to be what keeps everything on track. When we are mentally sharp, we can solve problems faster, we communicate better, and we can work more efficiently. So when we recognize that mental health isn't just a bonus thing to have, it's an absolute baseline for which we do the work that we do, we start to think about this subject differently and start to take it a little perhaps more seriously. So I think about mental health as a mental or a healthy mental framework really means that I can be better at what I do. I can make more effective decisions and I can engage more in what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. So I take my psychological health and others, and particularly those in the AT community, quite seriously, because your mind is everything, right? It underpins everything that you do. So learning strategies and tools for keeping it in a good place, I think it's really important. Before we get into those strategies, just let's name a few of the realities of your role and why some of those pressures can tip into stressors. So pressure is something that's built over time and adds something to the weight of what you're holding. And then when we experience stress, we experience that in a very physical as well as a psychological way. So some of those pressures that lead to stressors can be your timelines, not just the deadlines that you have to make, but the constantly shifting and changing timelines that you have to make, and the conflicting priorities, the shifting expectations from those in your organizations and the clients that you're working with. Your long screen hours and often with minimal movement. So you're pretty much glued to a machine most of the day. And that, you know, even sitting here for a little while, I find myself wanting to move and stretch. I'm really aware for some that work in silo roles or in hybrid working patterns, there can be isolation that comes with that. Maybe you work in varying size practices with other ATs in some practices, but maybe not in other practices. So I think sometimes we can be surrounded by people, but still feel quite alone, actually, and don't necessarily have a community of people always around us who get what we're doing and get where we're coming from. And then when you add that onto the constant need to revise, adapt, to be very precise and detailed, and the sort of the consequences of what you do and getting it right and getting it wrong, I think that adds mental weight. And I think the cumulative effect of that, if we don't address it early or we don't build good routines, I think those stressors build silently. And I've not even mentioned here things outside of work. So it can be quite a lot when you take into account all the things that are happening in our modern society and the challenges that presents in terms of maintaining a sense of work-life balance or just coping, I don't know, financially or caring responsibilities. I think it's just challenging. And it doesn't look like it's going to be getting any easier any soon. It just seems to be speeding up. And there's a real hidden cost of unmanaged pressure. So here's what happens when that pressure goes unmanaged. The first thing we do is lose focus about what's really important to us. And we lose focus in our ability to concentrate. And when we lose our ability to concentrate and focus on what needs to be focused on, our creativity gets blocked. Sometimes we can get really stuck as well. I feel like we're just going round in circles. If you ever feel like you're picking up the same thing and churning over it and going over it again, or you're in a loop, what feels like a time loop of, did I do this? Haven't I just done this before? That is a form of procrastination, you know, where your brain's ability to think clearly, straight, make decisions is starting to be compromised. And if we continue to press on when our brain is feeling like that, it can lead to burnout if we're not careful. Our communication can become reactive and avoidant. I know if my sleep is affected because I'm under a lot of pressure, I get quite short with people. So I've had to really work on making sure I'm managing those pressures in a healthy way. Otherwise, people probably crop the brunt of that a bit. Avoidant communication sometimes. So when we're under pressure, we go inward sometimes. We're coping with so much internal process, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on, that we shut down. It's like we go in, we flight inwards, and therefore we might not reach out when we need to reach out, or say the things that we need to say, or ask to park something, or ask permission to push something back, or ask for support or resource on something. On top of that, physical fatigue can sleep in. And I'm mentioning these, they're not personal flaws. I think they're structural outcomes of running on full tilt without enough recovery. So you're not flawed because you feel these things. They're things that we feel when we're not taking time to rest and recuperate. It's a bit like you think of running a marathon. If you were running a marathon every day for the rest of your life, can you imagine what toll that's going to take on your physical health as well as your psychological health? But with our minds, we seem to think it's okay to keep them sprinting, you know, every day, full pelt. And our minds need that time to rest. And we've got so used to being in our mind space that when we do stop, most of us go, I find it really hard to stop. You know, all these things come to my mind, and then I think about all this stuff, and it doesn't really feel like resting. And I think I should be doing something. These are signs that you're losing sight of what it means to rest, recoup, and recover. Your mind muscle is so overworked that your relaxation state has becoming dormant. So next time you do stop and break, and you think, oh my goodness, my mind is racing, just notice it without judgment, really. We're going to talk about metacognition later. I'll come to that in more and more detail. So just keep in mind that it's not a fault or a failure. It's just a sign that something has got out of balance. So I like to think of psychological health like bandwidth management. When your mental load gets too heavy, your capacity to design and plan and problem solve shrinks. When you're emotionally regulated, your ideas flow more easily, you speak with more clarity, decisions come faster, your collaboration improves. So a well-supported mind leads to higher quality outputs, and it's as simple as that. And that's why our mind is so important. So I mentioned metacognition before. I'm going to mention it again here and what it actually is. Metacognition is our ability to think about our thinking. So it's the ability to step back and notice quality of our thinking, what our thinking is doing, the role it's playing in what we're experiencing. So think of it as a kind of mental self-awareness. Without it, if we aren't thinking about what is my mind doing when I rest and stop and break, what is my mind constantly thinking about? If we don't take that slightly step back view and observe what our mind is doing, we find it really hard to catch early when we're struggling, or be proactive about how we manage our minds, actually. So metacognition is a tool that we use to think about our thinking. And you can do that in different ways. Like sometimes just journaling about what you're thinking is interesting. Lots of different ways to journal. Journaling I use a lot to process things that have happened to me during my day. And it's not something I use to go, I did this, I did that. It's not a chronologue of things that I did. It's about noticing what was coming up for me in my thinking that day, emotionally in that day. Was I fearful about something? Was I worried about something? But also analysing how often my mind does that. And I think that can give you some really good insights into where your mind is. Now, if you know or familiar with cognitive behavioural therapy, or any of the books around cognitive behavioural therapy, perhaps some of you have read The Chimp Paradox, which is a really good book about thinking about our thinking, actually. So sure you can find that on major bookstores online or in communities. But I think cognitive behavioural therapy is something that is worth you looking into and thinking more about as a tool to help you manage your thinking and your mind better, perhaps, if that's an area you wish to focus on. I know for me, that really was helpful. Thinking about my thinking, going, wow, my mind constantly catastrophizes. That I don't want to keep doing. So how do I change that? Well, like you want to change anything, the first thing is to be aware that you want it to change. And thinking we can change. That's the good news. Neuroplasticity tells us that it's possible to create new neurological pathways in our brain that makes us think differently. So I go, oh, I'm catastrophizing that thing because I'm really worried about it. So that's my first step. And then the second step is I might bring in another thinking pattern to that helps that. Okay, Nick, what are the facts? What's the likelihood of that happening? What other ways are there to think about this? What could I focus more on? And that is just one thinking style and pattern. There are many others. Emotional reasoning was another one that I experienced. So I used to wake up early and feel quite anxious in the morning about the day ahead. And then that feeling would trigger a whole set of thoughts for me of doom and gloom and foreboding about what was going to come and how awful the day was going to be. So I recognized that that feeling was quite common for me in the morning. And then I recognized all the thoughts that were anchored to that feeling and went, yeah, they're not helpful. Can't quite stop the feeling. So you're thinking you can change. Like if I asked you to imagine a nice holiday you went on, most of you would be able to manage that, to think about that. If I asked you to imagine, I don't know, a red letterbox, most of you would probably be able to think about that or conjure up the mental imagery of that. So changing our thinking is simple. It's not always easy, but it is simple. Whereas feelings, you can't just command to change like that. So if you're sad and I tell you to cheer up, just cheer up. It's not going to work. If you're angry and I go, you just calm down, it's not going to work, right? There's no point doing that to feelings. Feelings work differently to how our thoughts work. So thoughts we can change. If we change our thoughts, however, it's more likely to have an impact on our felt state. So don't command or tell anyone else to change how they feel. Not going to work. Complete waste of your time and energy. So don't tell yourself that. Acknowledge feelings that come up. Go, gosh, yeah, I'm anxious today. Anxiety is here with me today. Whereas thinking, okay, well, what can I do with that? How can I think about this differently? What is helpful in my thinking? What isn't helpful in my thinking is useful. And there's some really good books that you can find online to help you with that. So catching what's happening to us in any given moment is important. Having self-awareness is important, but it's not just about emotional intelligence. I think it's just about mental efficiency. It's about how we manage our mind. So let's get into some strategies, because I think that's what is important. But before I do my first strategy, I'm going to caveat it with something, because what my first strategy is seems simple and obvious, right? But I think it's the obvious things that go out the window first when we are feeling overwhelmed or we've got too much on. And actually, they are the very foundations in which we should hold everything else that we have to cope with. So you can go on these talks and they can come up with lots of great ideas and tips about things that you should be doing for your mental health. And sometimes it can feel like, oh my gosh, there's more I've got to do. I would suggest starting with the basics and keeping it really simple. So the first one is movement, especially if you're at a screen all day long. So I really value I don't gym. I don't go to a gym. I don't run marathons. I don't cycle. I'm sure many of you do here. That's a great thing. Keep doing that. My body just doesn't seem to like that stuff. But even if you do those things, even if you are someone that's incredibly active, you will notice the effects of sitting down all day on your body. So there's something called the Pomodoro technique, which you can Google after this. I love this technique. It's also really good for people who have neurodivergence. Struggles with time boundaries. So you might struggle with a time boundary if you really lose track of time when you're doing stuff. Pomodoro technique works in 25-minute chunks. So you set a timer on your phone. You can buy one of their proper timers if you want. I don't, I just use my phone. 25 minutes. And I'm intentional about what I work on for that 25 minutes. So in the morning, I go, these are my 25-minute stints, broadly speaking. Or I go, this is my first one. I'll think about my second one after that. I work for 25 minutes, and then you get up and you move for 5. That's it. Move away from your desk, walk outside, get some fresh air, and walk back in. Grab yourself some water, because we're going to talk about hydration. Move, physically move, go up the stairs, down the stairs, and come back. That is so much better for your posture during the day than anything else. If you want to get more active with that, you can do some other exercises. I mean, squats and things. If you're working from home, maybe that's fine. In the office, that might look a little weird. but physically move if you can. Every kind of 25-minute sessions of that, you take a longer break. 35 minutes is much better than working all morning, working through your lunch, and then working all afternoon into the evening. Just breaking that up will do something really good for your psychological health and your physical health. So sleep is about not just getting more, it's about improving the quality of your sleep. So that is about having good wind down routines and bedtime routines. And that is something that I have had to really work on, because I'm a bit of an owl. So I work better later, but it meant I was going to bed, my mind was really active and it was really impacting my sleep. So now I'm very boring. I have a 9 o'clock routine that involves journaling and meditating and a bit of reading, and about just being more intentional and taking gratitude for my day. And I know when I first thought of all of this and somebody mentioned it, and I thought, yeah. But you know what? It's been so important to me. And now, having years of done that, just as a non-negotiable. You can use sleep apps. For some, they're really useful about measuring your quality of sleep. For others, it can be a bit anxiety triggering, because if you find you're not having good quality sleep, that might make you feel a bit more anxious about your sleep. So it's about finding things that really work for you. The NHS has some good strategies around better sleeping patterns and how we might go about developing that. I mean, there's some really obvious ones like caffeine, not too late, making sure your body is hydrated earlier on in the day. So you're sleeping with being hydrated, but not too much to the point you need to get up and go loo every 5 minutes in the night. You know, tech too late is a problem. That's just keeping that mind muscle going. It continues to go way beyond we put the screen down. So just making sure we chunk that into earlier points in our day, giving ourselves actual space to stop. Hydration, you'd be quite surprised how dehydrated we are as a race, actually as a society. We don't drink enough generally. Drinking too much is a problem too, but most of us don't get near to that point. And this is about regular hydration throughout the day. And I really know if I'm not hydrated, I get brain fog, just can't think properly. My brain feels like it's tight, slightly buzzing, and I hate that feeling. So realizing that I need to keep on top of my hydration is important. And good nutrition. I'm not going to get into nutritional details here, but keeping sugar spikes steady, really, you wanting to make sure you maintain your glucose levels at a way that sustains your performance throughout the day. So those are things you could research beyond this, but I would suggest, thinking about any other techniques without getting the basics right, or getting that not right. That sounds like we need to be really perfect about these things, and I don't agree with that. Just improving them, I think, is really important. Okay, second one, bit more complicated, this one, but it's been a game changer for me. Understanding my own psychological makeup and everybody else's. We have 3 emotional systems that are really active in all of us. We have a drive system, which is about your energy and your ambition, why you do the things you do. This is your motivation level. It's the thing that drives you forward. Now, when we talk about the drive system, I want to talk about motivation from an intrinsic perspective and an extrinsic perspective. Intrinsic is really important, actually, because intrinsic means things like things we deeply value, hold important to us, things we're curious about, whether we enjoy problem solving, that whether just making a contribution or doing something good for my community. These are about your values. I value learning. I value interaction with others. I value making a difference. Those are my intrinsic motivations to do the things that I do. Extrinsic motivations are things where we get rewarded outside of us. So things like financial reward, acclaim, recognition, either from peers or clients, promotion, validation. Extrinsic and intrinsic motivation needs to be balanced. if we are constantly focused on extrinsic motivation, we're probably going to lead to burnout and disillusionment. We're looking outside of ourselves for things to satisfy us. That's not to say we shouldn't have some of these motivations. I'm motivated by some of those extrinsic motivations, but I really make sure I balance those with intrinsic motivations. I get really clear on my values. And actually, there's a really good values exercise you can do online for free to figure out what your top 5 are. At the end of this call, or maybe Usman, I could give that to you after, a link that people could have a go at that if they would like to learn a little bit more about that. So that's your drive system. Let's talk a little bit about the threat system. Stress and vigilance. You can't turn off your threat system and survive, right? Your threat system is constantly looking out in your environment for dangers or problems for you to solve. Now, sometimes some of us will have an overactive threat system where it's like a faulty alarm system, right? It's super hyper vigilant, and any change in the environment is triggered, and it goes off. And really, we only want it to go off when there's a real threat, when there's real smoke. So our threat system is here to protect us, but when it's in overdrive, it can become overprotective. And when it becomes overprotective, we feel like we need to control everyone and everything around us. The soothe system, the system that gets most forgotten about and is usually most undeveloped, is the recovery and the emotional reset system. It's the system that keeps the two other in balance. So in architectural technology and in our industry, what you see in busy environments is most people toggle between these two. They're missing that important link, the soothe. So I mentioned metacognition earlier, and it comes back in here, because when you take a moment to slow down and to notice which system you are mostly operating in, you can make intentional shifts to slow down or to pause or to reset before stress takes over. So you can sit and go, what does drive me? Am I constant? The problem is, if we are constantly in drive and threat, what we end up with is what I call anxious overachievement. I set really high standards for myself, and I constantly fear I'm not going to meet them. And so I get this, and actually, in some ways, it's made us very successful, right? Because I'm anxious to prove myself. So I keep doing more. And then I keep doing more and I take on more and I can't do it all. And then my threat system gets triggered. So some of us are just constantly ricocheting between those two things. Metacognition says, oh, okay, see what I'm doing here. How do I develop my soothe system to bring those other two systems into balance? So just asking yourself a question like, what helps me decompress without checking out? How do I know when my drive system has perhaps tipped into burnout? What is the quality of my threat system? You know, what maintenance is kind of needed there? So understanding a little bit about these systems, being aware of them, your motivations, the things that you're concerned by, worried about, managing those, managing your thinking around that threat system, developing your soothe system, even in terms of how you talk to yourself, how you rest, how you switch off, those are really important things. Okay, let's go third strategy. And I think really important to be proactive about our support. Most of us wait till things get really bad before we ask for help. And actually, one of the tools that I've put in place for myself is having a really good, well-developed support network around me. I think confidence grows through connection. So I kind of invite you to create your own, what I call a cycle of 6. Now, these are not roles, these are roles, not titles. and some may overlap, and for you, some may be missing. But this circle of people, these people that are good for these things, help you navigate your life and your work and your day-to-day interactions, really. Help you navigate your return relationally, not just professionally. So I have people that I go to, like role models that are like, I have one who's a really good boundary setter, because it's something I'm not always that great at. I haven't been in the past, so good at it now, but I haven't been. So I just have somebody I go to who's really assertive in setting boundaries, because I find that's good for me. Somebody that understands politics, or maybe picks up on things I don't perhaps pick up on. That's really useful. I also have somebody who acts like a bit of a mirror for me, so they're good at kind of just saying what they see. They might flag up if they think I'm doing too much. I think that's quite helpful. I have somebody, actually, the mirror and the grit person for me are one of the same people. And that is somebody who helps me work through things when they're really tough, so I don't catastrophize them or become overwhelmed by them. And the expander is actually somebody who's just really, I'm inspired by. And these can be real people, or they could, people in your life or your work or outside of work, or they can be people you follow online. But I try to balance that. I try to constantly, those are things that I need in my circle of 6. So I'm constantly either connecting to those literally in person, or through reading books or watching YouTubes or podcasts and things like that. So I think getting proactive about our support is important, and just reminding us that support isn't for big problems. It's about staying sharp. It's about talking to somebody who understands your rhythm, flagging pressure points before they become breakdowns. Reaching out early is strategic, I think. I don't think it's emotional. I think it's strategic. And I think it's an essential part of your toolkit. Okay, courageous conversations at work. Mental health conversations can feel awkward, but I don't think they need to be. And I think we can simplify how we start conversations here. Like, where's your kind of mental load sitting on a scale of 1 to 10? How much pressure are you under? Do you need to reinforce any of your internal support systems? I think building in these sorts of questions might be better than saying, how's your mental health? I have no problem with asking someone how their mental health is. And many people now have a much better healthy view of what that means. Some still don't. But the word itself can be quite loaded. So it's about finding language that just makes sense to you in your community, that seems a little bit more accessible. I think actually normalizing and using language that fits more appropriately can normalize these conversations with a bit more clarity without turning it into what feels like therapy. I know people don't always like in work to feel like they're having some sort of therapy conversation with someone. So it's about normalizing it. It's about finding appropriate language that fits for you and the people that you work with. And I really believe that culture isn't built on a policy. It's built on consistent tone and practice. And that takes every one of us to do that. So that's summary. I can't believe it's so quick. The call's gone. I think to bring it together. So I think the main takeaways from this is that your mind is your main tool. And just like any technical system, it is active, and therefore it needs maintenance and ongoing maintenance. That stress can affect our clarity and our communication and decision making, but being proactive about our resilience means balancing our internal systems, developing our soothe system, and having recovery practices. So resting, resetting, working out what works for you to do that. And I think support creates momentum, not dependency, despite maybe what some people think. I think support is what keeps you focused. I think your support network can keep you refreshed. I think it can keep you energized. And equally, I think you can be a really important part of somebody else's support system. So it's not all about us, it's also about how we support each other in our community. So lots here, lots to think about. Don't overwhelm yourself. I think just asking yourself one small adjustment you can make today to protect your mental clarity or support someone else's is a really good reflective question that you could take away from this session. So I'm going to ask if there are any questions. You're very welcome to put them in the chat. I just want to mention the Architectural Benevolent Society. I'm talking about this, I'm aware I'm talking about this on a surface level, really, because we've got such a short time. I'm also aware that for some people can be in really not a good place. And whether you are or you aren't, I want to reiterate that the Architects Benevolent Society is here to support you. They're a team of human beings, just like us, who know a bit about the pressures of this industry, actually. So please don't hesitate to contact them. Numbers on the screen, got a good website, give you all sorts of resources and information available. So I'm just going to have a look at the chat, see if there's any questions. Oh gosh, there's a few things in here. I haven't had a chance to look at all these.
Great, thank you, Nicola. Whilst we're looking at that, and obviously potentially looking at those questions that you've kindly gathered prior to the event, obviously one of the probably common responses will be, and which you did briefly touch on, is I'm so busy, how can I take time out? How can I potentially look at doing the Pomodoro technique? How can I'm finding it hard to switch off. What's the sort of the first thing that you would sort of suggest for someone in that position? Or, for example, I don't know how to speak to my colleagues, my line managers, my directors, etc., about this situation. Or potentially, I can see my director needs some time off.
Yeah, that's
and so on.
Yeah. Okay, so there's lots of different questions there. I'm going to take a couple at a time if I can. I struggle with switching off. In fact, that also came up in your community of questions that I got earlier. So what's something practical I can do? I think a good starting point is something called a transition ritual. Something small that signals work mode is off, switch off to switch back on later. You've got to find what your ritual is. Now, for some, that can be a cycle home. For others, it can be listening to music on the way home. It could be shutting down your laptop and doing a breathing exercise of some point. I think what you're trying to do is let your nervous system know that you are now entering what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest system. So usually in work, we're in our nervous system, it's switched on. You have to signal to your body at some point that you want to enter a different system. And that different strategies work for different people. I actually, even in work, if I'm feeling overwhelmed with something, like we might see that when work, we do this and then we relax outside of work. I think we have to think about it much more blended than that, because the boundaries between home and work now are so much more blurred. So I, even in work, and even sitting here right now, can practice diaphragmatic breathing without you even knowing that I am. And what we tend to do when we're stressed is breathe short and from our chest. Diaphragmatic breathing is taking a breath in from our belly upwards and elongating our out breath slightly more. Now, this sounds like, I don't know, simple. And it is simple. It's really powerful. And actually what you're doing to your body and your system and your diaphragm is telling it it's okay. You can relax. So I think it's not always, I think, yes, if you haven't even got a wind down or a ritual that signals you're ending your day, start with that. But actually, more importantly, I think it's about weaving these things into our day. And I would suggest if we're too busy, we're perhaps too busy focusing on the wrong things, and not through mostly through care, right? You care about what you do, and you're getting so many demands placed on you. I understand that. But I just know that if we don't get busy looking after our psychological health and mental health, you won't be helping anybody later down the line. So it's not about swinging the pendulum in any one direction in a too extreme way. It's just going, please just bring that back into balance a little bit where you can. You asked a question also about the manager, so I'll just briefly ask that one as well. How can I raise a mental health concern with my manager without feeling like I'm failing? So I would start framing it around performance, maybe. Like, I've noticed I'm not working at my usual level, and I'm trying to be really proactive about my stress levels. And I think just saying something like that puts you in a really strong position. And I think it moves away from that confessional we talked about earlier and more towards professional self-awareness. And I think leaders appreciate that clarity and that maturity in how concerns are raised. I understand leaders will vary in terms of their emotional intelligence around how they deal with those conversations. Does that answer? I'm aware of time. Just briefly, does that help answer?
That's great. That's great. Really interesting one from someone in the community. It is my greatest stress was retiring and not being prepared. So it goes on a bit further, but yeah, that's a really interesting point.
So I want to come in and answer that, because it's a major transition. Going from being in a workplace, being flat out, to retiring is one of the most significant transitions you make in your life. And I work with practices where we have coaching conversations way before retirement to help someone really prepare for retirement and to get the most out of that, and to think about the changes from a psychological perspective that are going to happen as you enter into retirement. So I think it is something that we haven't really talked about in the workplace very much, and it feels a bit taboo to talk about it, but actually really important. And I'm not surprised that person found it quite challenging, actually.
So now if we jump to the community of questions that you've got, Nicola, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, I think we covered most of them. They were pretty much in here. Let me just see anything else. What if I?
Okay. No, I was going to one thing I was going to say is that I know you again touched on it, but one thing is if you're really out of practice in regards to this, and you're starting to introduce these systems, one thing that probably is worth highlighting, it may take some time for you to actually feel benefit, feel a change. That might be something to sort of elaborate on, because ultimately someone may be quite frustrated to sort of take time out, in essence, of their work day to try and sort of break this up and feel no benefit. So that might so that might be something to
I couldn't agree more. I think about yourself as work in progress, or this is work in progress. Give yourself a year to come up with something. Try different things out. Experiment for a year. Make a note of it. See what works, what doesn't. You've got to give this time, ongoing time. I can't do a meditation today and then think I'm going to be a Zen master for the rest of my life. And I think that's what's really, that's why sometimes having a coach or some accountability person to help you is important, because you don't always see the changes. You know, as a coach, what I'm often doing is reflecting back to people what I've noticed, what I've seen, how what they're learning is now being applied in practice, because I think it's really hard to see when you're doing it. Journaling can help. If you don't want to coach or want to work to someone on a one-to-one basis, journaling can be good with that. Another question that I did have was, what if I've already hit burnout and how do I recover? I think firstly, see burnout as not a failure, it's feedback, actually. I would start small. I would reset first, then reflect. So asking yourself, get help if you're in burnout. Like, burnout is like you're exhausted, you're really not okay. I think you probably need some professional help and support at that point. And that support can help you reflect on what got you here, what patterns of belief had kept you pushing you past your warning signs. And I think recovery is not just about taking a break, it's about redesigning the systems you're operating in so that so it supports your long-term capacity.
And then something else that might be worth adding as well is, I think maybe sort of on in addition to what you've just highlighted, is that just remembering that you are part of a team, you are part of a community, whichever company you might be within, you are valued. So it's just remembering that, yes, if you feel vulnerable, everyone is there for you. So that might be something to sort of take a bit further to just sort of elaborate upon. But ultimately, you're just because you have a vulnerability doesn't mean that you suddenly need to then swiftly move to the exit door. It's really grown up to sort of highlight that and potentially, like Nicola's mentioning, maybe look at a culture change in regards to the way that you're physically working. Maybe it's something that you've been pushing yourself towards.
Yeah, I agree. And you've got a community here, right? I mean, 80 people at least turned up for this call today with an interest in this subject and have been willing to, talk to us about it. So I think there's a community here that we could utilize, if nothing else, actually.
Most definitely. That's a really good point, Nicola. Is there any other final bits that you want to sort of run through before we wrap this up?
No, I could spend hours talking to you all about this subject. I love it, but I'm not going to. I think I don't want to overload you with too much. I hope that's been helpful.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Nicola. I'm going to post another message into the group anyway. Please do reach out to the ABS directly if you have any specific concerns where you feel like you might have reached a point of a complete exhaustion, etc. They are there. They have trained people to speak to you. If this is something that everyone feels like we could sort of build upon, then we can have further discussions on what types of events to have in the future on this type of subject matter. Just to highlight the talks that we have coming up for the rest of the year, excuse me, we have a 4 or 5 more for the year, with the following talk in August being from Will Arnold from iStruct-E, Reducing Embodied Carbon and with a Structural Engineer on the 13th of August. We have Limiting Thermal Bridging Design by Dr. Matthew Brooke-Peat from the 17th of September. We have Planning and Regeneration Update on the 15th of October from Savills Planning. We have Wildlife Friendly Lighting Design on the 12th of November from Jennifer Neal, Ecological Lighting Design. And then to wrap up the year, we have Why Specify Natural Slate and Firelight from Simon Johnstone of SSQ Riverstone. And that's on the 10th of December. Hopefully that will be a great end to the year. So lots to look forward to. And thank you everyone for your time. Thank you very much, Nicola and the ABS, for doing the event today. Please do reach out to us directly. We will be sending out I presume it will be via link, but we will discuss that internally, how we're going to share out the access to this talk. As highlighted at the beginning of the talk, this is obviously a great starter, but obviously these type of subject matters can be spoken about in various different forms and have different effects, much like mentioning of the circle of 6, and various different strategies to sort of really make sure that you're unlocking your full potential. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you all at our next event.
Thank you, everyone.